Good morning. Good morning. Please have a seat. Thank you, worship team. If you're wondering why I've got a book, keep wondering. um, Many years ago, it wasn't just me, but we as a family went. We go through these seasons, right? Where, and this particular season that we went through, I think it was 2008. I was unemployed for 6 months. And when those periods are like there's nothing happening, literally. God opened an amazing door for myself, which I could not have engineered. And this particular company offered me to do something for them. And they said, we don't know how you're going to justify what you're going to do, but all we know is that God asked us to employ you in our company. I was like, what? What am I going to do? And they said, we want you to start journaling and spending time in God's Word and praying on behalf of our company. I'm like, I don't know how that's going to fit into my job description and my CV down the line. But it did something for me. I had to unlearn what it meant to read God's Word and actually what it meant to hear His voice. And this book is representative of that time because I started journaling. And so I've been journaling since 2008. I'm not doing it every day. I don't get paid to do it. But it started a process of just coming before God and saying, Lord, what do you want to say? Without any preconceived ideas. And some of the stuff that I've written down is like, I actually don't understand what I'm writing. Is this for me? Is it for somebody else? Or whatever it is. All I know is that God said I need to write. And so I'm going to share some of the things that I wrote last week. And Angelo, are you able to put up the... Oh, it's behind me. Oh, you can see it. I can't. But before I'm going to share about the first rain and from moving from manna to wheat, you might be wondering, what the heck is that? I wrote it down in my book. Okay? And I'm going to explain why I wrote it in the book. But I also wrote this. It says, don't believe the bad report. I don't know who it's for, but I want to say this morning, don't believe the bad report. It may feel like an assault of arrows into many areas of your life. Right? Your finances, your health, your marriage, your children, your destiny. The enemy trying to make you feel like all your prayers, all your contending, and all your seasons of obedience and surrender were in vain. One of you or all of you might be feeling that this morning. You've been contending. You're like, yo Lord, I don't know how many tears I can cry anymore. Don't believe the bad report. The second phrase is, block out the noise. I know it's difficult. It's difficult because we get reminded about it every day. We see it on the TV. Somebody says something and it triggers you. Don't believe the bad report. And so with the questions, who has felt the strong sense that you want to give up? I know I have. Who has felt the spirit of death trying to follow you around? It's like you just see death everywhere. And I want to say this morning, don't believe the bad report that the enemy, Satan, is trying to say about your life this morning. Don't fall for the lies. And so this morning, as I'm about to share this word, the concept of the first rain, there's a particular verse in the Bible. And move. From Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 14, it says this: that I will give the rain of your land in its season, the former rain and the latter rain, that thou mayest gather in thy grain. That's the American Standard Version. The New International Version says this: then I will send rain on your land in its season, both autumn and spring rains, so that you may gather in your grain, new wine and olive oil. I will provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied. And so, what I wrote in my book last week was the 2 words, or 3 words, the first rain. And I said, Lord, what do you mean by the first rain? And if you understand the story of the Israelites in wandering in the 40 years in the desert, God gave Moses very specific instructions about what is to come as they enter into the promised land. And Deuteronomy chapter 11 is one of those chapters where it speaks about the blessings and the curses. That if you do this, then this will happen. If you don't do this, that will happen. And this particular verse, in chapter 11, verse 14, speaks about the first rain. If you understand the agricultural cycle during that time, is that the first rains fell between October to December. But now you have to also understand that they've been wandering in the desert for 40 years. They did not experience rain. In fact, God had to provide for them through manna daily. They woke up and there was whatever was prepared for them. Peanut butter and jam for 40 years. Think about that. Eating the same thing for 40 years. Living in a desert, when Moses speaks these words, you're like, what rain? There is no rain here. We're in a desert. But God through Moses spoke of a land that they're going to inherit. It says, you will inherit homes you did not build. You will benefit from vineyards you did not plant, and you will eat of the land. Now understand, if you've been eating manna for 40 years, that concept is wild. And so, I want to say, wherever you find yourself, whatever season you may find yourself in, that it might be your manna season, but I'm saying the wheat season is coming. And what do I mean by that? The Israelites wandered for 40 years. They could not imagine that they were going to eat wheat every day. And in fact, God says, you did not have to plant it because I planted it for you. And I want to believe that both naturally and spiritually, all of us are in some season of barrenness, but longing for fruitfulness. And so the first rain is the spark of a new agricultural cycle. So if you understand agriculture, that farmers don't want storms. They want the gentle rain that will soak the earth to unlock the seeds that's in the ground so it can germinate and grow. And so the first rain softens the soil, awakens dormant seed, and signals that a new season has begun. And so some of you are longing for a new season to begin. It marks transition. And I think God is so amazing in His wisdom that He is teaching us something about manna, seed, rain, and wheat. And that made sense to a people who one day will become farmers. They were not farmers. You didn't farm anything for 40 years. It was just the desert. But He spoke of something saying that you will tend the soil. And so the first rain is the early rain. And so it speaks of moving from the old to the new, from wandering to cultivating, from manna to wheat. Now you must understand that if you've been wandering for 40 years in the desert, the only thing you know is the desert. You don't know anything about living in a house. You don't know anything about tending the crops. And so I believe that we are standing in a moment, both as Community Ministries Resource Center and us individually, but also our country, our continent, and the world. I don't know if you noticed this, but there's been a lot of road closures over the last few days. What an inconvenience. But here's what's happening if you're not aware of it. The entire world's attention is on our country for this week. Over 40 countries are here. There's no mean feat. Some didn't want to come, but that's fine. But I want to say this, that there is the beginning of the soft rain in the soil that's being prepared for something new to emerge. And there's something to be said about South Africa. We punch above our weight category. I don't know if you've noticed with our national teams over the last couple of months, they should not have won, but they have. There's something that God wants to reveal to us as a nation, as a continent, because it's not just about us. And so I pray that as you recognize the soft rain that is falling on our country and our continent, that God is wanting to shift things. Why? Because we have been praying for years. Lord, send your Spirit, send revival. But here's the thing, revival will not look the way you expect it to show up. Revival will happen very differently. Like for these Israelites, where they longed for a promised land, but they didn't know what to expect. And so, can you move on to the next slide, please? In Joshua chapter 5, it says, the day after Passover, the very day they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan. So what I've done is we've gone from Deuteronomy chapter 11, where God said, you're about to cross over, and they've crossed over. Now what do you do with yourself? You've not crossed over. And so I'm going to focus on these particular two scriptures to show us that the concept of the first rain is a biblical concept of whatever happens in our lives as we long for something new. And the concept of moving from manna to wheat is not some weird scenario, but it's a process that God took the Israelites through to demonstrate how He shifts them from the old season, from wandering to cultivating. Imagine that. From not being a farmer to being a farmer. And so we are standing in that spiritual moment right now. Thank you, Angela. And so what does it mean to move from manna to wheat? I think we need to understand the seasons that God takes us through. There's both physical seasons and there are spiritual seasons that we go through. And so, when Israel entered the promised land, the Lord shifted them from the manna, the supernatural, daily, unpredictable supply, into wheat. We're like, okay, that's a bit dramatic. Which required sowing, planting, cultivating, and harvesting. So understand the psychological thing that is happening to the Israelites. That for 40 years, you just relied on somebody else to give you food. To where now you have to contend and plant for yourself. So the question I want to ask you this morning, are you in a manna season? A manna season is marked by these things: daily dependence, unpredictability, grace without effort, simple obedience, collect for today, and rest on the Sabbath. Because remember, here's something that God told him: you need to eat whatever I provide for you today. And there were some who actually tried to keep the manna for the following day. And guess what? Maggots. And so it was unpredictable. You could not extend God's blessing to the following day. It was just meant for that day. It's not a season of planning. It was a season of trusting. They had to, for 40 years, trust that the following day that there will be food for them. That is hectic. Some of us know exactly what it feels like. Work is unpredictable. In fact, for some of us, it's non-existent. Finances are inconsistent. For some of us, it's not there. Spiritual clarity, you feel foggy. It feels like you've hit a glass ceiling. Lord, my prayers are not going anywhere. I cannot see clearly. And then your plans are constantly shifting. Lord, I'm trusting you for this thing, and then it doesn't happen. You're going in this direction, and then all of a sudden there's a side road. Lord, I'm longing for that thing, but I trust you and I claim it. And we use all these spiritual words. And so some of us are in a manna season. And I want to say this morning, that our manna seasons are not signs of immaturity. And some of us struggle with this concept because is there something that we did wrong? The Israelites did nothing wrong. It was their lot to walk through and wander for 40 years in the desert. You know, I was thinking, but that is not very fair. You have to understand that it took 40 years for God to remove Egypt out of their hearts. There's always a backstory. For 400 years, they were slaves to other people as an entire nation. So they had to understand that they're no longer slaves, and it took 40 years for them to realize that we are no longer slaves. Don't underestimate the manna season that you find yourself in. Don't underestimate that which is so entrenched in us, the trauma, our thinking, our mindsets of, because as you go into the next season of crossing the Jordan, you cannot be a slave in that place, because why? You're going to own your own home. You're going to tend your own fields. And so, in Joshua chapter 5, verse 1, it says this: Now when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over. Their hearts melted in fear, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. Before the crossover, things dry up. Before the Israelites could cross over to the Jordan, God had to dry up the river. In fact, if you read Joshua chapters 1 to 4 or 3, there's a situation that unfolds where God tells Joshua, in 3 days' time, consecrate yourself because in 3 days' time you're going to cross the Jordan. Yeah. Imagine that. For 40 years you've been waiting, and then all of a sudden you get the news. 3 days' time. Graham, imagine you get that email. In 3 days' time you're going to Australia. What will you do? Can you imagine the plans you're making? You're not sure what plans you're supposed to be making because you're going into a land you don't know. And in fact, in Deuteronomy chapter 11, God actually describes to the Israelites, you are going into a valley and mountains where you have constant rain. Imagine that. No rain for 40 years, and now you're going to have rain. It's a mind shift change. It's a heart change that needs to happen. And that's why God had to tell them, consecrate yourselves, prepare yourselves, because you're going into a land that I prepared for you, but you don't actually know what I have for you. It is good. In fact, he describes it in Deuteronomy. It is so good, a land flowing with milk and honey. We struggle with the concept of it, things can go well for us because we're so used to it being bad. We're so used to white-knuckling it and tensing our teeth that when the good things do appear, we struggle with accepting it that God says it's good and it's for us. Don't believe the bad reports. And so, the Jordan had to dry up for them to move across. Here's the interesting thing. If you read Joshua chapter 3, and some theologians, when they speak about 1 to 3, verses 1 to 3, they said that the Israelites could not take their structures with them. Whatever they had for 40 years, they had to leave it behind because they couldn't take it with them. And in verse 4 of Joshua chapter 3, there's a little verse that says this, and God says to them, you need to listen carefully to what I'm about to say to you. God says this. He says, listen exactly to the instructions I'm giving you. He says, because where you are going, you haven't been before. Imagine that. And so some of us are finding ourselves in places where we haven't been before. In fact, we don't have the muscle memory of how to engage the situation. We don't have the experience of we haven't been there before. And I want to say this to you this morning, and including myself, you cannot take what you had before with you into the new. You cannot rely on your ability to figure things out. In the 40 years that you walked around a mountain, it would have taken you 13 days to get to the other side. Just because it would have taken you 13 days, imagine if it took them 13 days and they walked into the new, they would have messed it up because they still had the mindset of a slave. Sometimes the Lord announces transition not by opening a door, but by closing one. Where things dry up. And so just as Elijah, if you've read the story of Elijah in 1 Kings, and in 1 Kings chapter 17, Elijah had just come from a victory of the whole thing with the 400 prophets and of Baal and all of that. He had a great victory. And then the next day somebody, the queen, Jezebel, said, "Who is this dude?" And when she asked the question, "Who is this dude?" he ran for his life. Imagine that. You experienced a great victory, and the very next day, you're running for your life. And so, in that context, Elijah then hides. And in fact, even what happened after that, he prophesied that there will be no rain in the land for 3 years. And so he's on the run, hiding in a cave, feeling sorry for himself. And in the same way, God, like He did with the Israelites, provided food for him every morning. Imagine that. You get breakfast every morning, served in bed by God. And he stayed by a little stream, and there was water flowing. Now you need to understand, when Elijah prophesied there will not be rain on the land, we tend to forget the things that we say, it actually impacts on us as well. And the stream and the brook dried up. There was no rain. And so sometimes we have to recognize the things that's drying up in our lives. It could be old assignments are ending. Old provision is shrinking. In fact, it's drying up. The manna stopped. God no longer offered a concierge service to Elijah. He had to move. Old relationships are shifting. Some of you, in your relationships, things are shifting. And old opportunities are actually drying up. But Lord, I'm good at this. The thing you thought you were good at is not the thing that's providing for you anymore. And that's a difficult place to be in. But God says, He has not abandoned you. And so like Elijah that felt like he was abandoned, Lord, you're no longer providing breakfast for me. And I don't have my orange juice on tap anymore. It wasn't God's way of saying that I'm abandoning you. It was God saying it's time to go. Because otherwise you're going to get too comfortable in this position. I actually have an assignment for you. And that assignment was, guess what? I need to go back to the lady that's looking for you. When things dry up, it's not punishment. It's not punishment. We tend to think that this cause and effect thing that happens. And sometimes our decisions cause us to be in particular situations. But most times it's God saying, that thing that's drying up in your life, I actually want you to go and move on to something better that I have for you. And it's usually preparation. And I'm like, Lord, can't you just send a memo? Any of you watched that movie, Evan Almighty? Right? Where this God appears and says, I need you to build an ark. like really? And things start happening to him. And he starts building the ark. And guess what? He starts growing a beard. He starts wearing whatever clothes Noah wore during that time. And there's a scene where his family actually leaves him and said, we can't deal with this. Whatever's going on here with you, you're on your own. Figure it out. And there's a scene where his family, his wife and his kids is reversing out of the driveway, and he's standing there, looking at his family, leaving him, and then the sprinklers go on. And his response is, yeah, you said you love me. And most of us feel like that sometimes. Don't believe the bad report, because God is preparing you for something. And then God rolls away the old season. In Joshua chapter 5, for those of you who are still following, verse 9 it says, and now they've crossed over, right? Now you're wondering what happens? They've crossed over, so what happens now? And then Jesus, or God at least says to Joshua, the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So the place has been called Gilgal to this day. Why would God say this? What is the reproach of Egypt? The reproach of Egypt is this. For 400 and odd years, they were slaves. For 40 years, God took them through a process of, I would say, training their minds and their bodies to move from being slaves to ones to being dependent on Him. Now that they're in the promised land, He says, that thing that has been a generational curse for you, I have taken it away. The reproach of Egypt is no longer on your bloodline. I hope that you get revelation for just this phrase, that the reproach of Egypt has been rolled away. And I'll say to you this morning that whatever your Egypt is, it ends today. Whatever lie that you've believed, it ends today. And pray that God might replace it with the truth. That you are no longer defined by your Egypt. You're no longer defined from the family that you come from, where you grew up. The horrible situations, the emotional trauma that you've been through. God is saying, I want to roll away the reproach. And so the word Gilgal comes from the word Galal, means to roll, to turn like a circle. So some of you feel like you've been going in circles for years. Imagine walking around a mountain for 40 years and you can actually see the promised land over there. But God says the cycle is complete. The wilderness is over. The reproach is lifted. The old identity, the old shame, the old limitation, it is rolled away. Why? He sent His Son Jesus. He says it is finished when He hung on the cross. He says, sin will no longer have dominion over you, nor death. Nor your past mistakes, nor your family name, your background, your social class, the fact that you are poor, the fact that you are rich, that shall not be your reproach anymore. I am positioning you for joy, wholeness, and purpose. In fact, there's a scripture that says, I have come that you might have life and have it in abundance. John 10, verse 10. We know that the thief only comes to steal, kill, and to destroy. But God says, through my Son, that has been put to an end. No longer will the thief steal from you. And then something dramatic happened in Joshua 5, verse 10. It's one of those dramatic verses, and I read it earlier, but I'm going to read it now for effect. And it says this. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. In fact, those of you who were in church last week, Francois spoke about the concept of the Passover and what that meant. Verse 11, it says, the day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread, and roasted grain. Verse 12, the manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan. Imagine that. You're dependent on manna for 40 years. And then the manna stopped. In one day, in one moment, they went from manna to wheat. What took a generation to promise, only to God one day to provide. He had promised in Deuteronomy that you will eat of a land you did not plant. You will live in houses you did not build. You will be a land flowing with milk and honey. It's a very, while somebody says this to you and in your manna season, you actually won't get it. Because your mindset says this to you: I am dependent on manna every day. You can't even imagine that, what? I'm going to be a farmer. What is that? I'm going to live in a place where it rains. Right now, I don't see any rain because there is no rain in this desert. I believe the Lord is saying that He wants to shift us from a manna season into a wheat season. We will no longer contend, but we will bask in what He has for us, good things. For those of you who are familiar with slavery in the U.S., and our African American brothers and sisters, while they were being oppressed by those slaves, tending those cotton fields as tobacco fields, one of the things that they did to help them was, and they call it the Negro spirituals, in a sweet by and by. While they're being whipped, they sang these songs: swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. That what I'm experiencing today, that one day I will no longer be somebody's slave. That heaven is laid up for me. And if you look back at the old songs that we used to sing, they were actually based on a context of, it's really bad for us, but we won't believe the bad report, because my God says that one day I will see His Son Jesus, and that I will live like a king, because He says, I've laid up for you treasures in heaven. I'm building a house that is laid up for you. So what does it mean if you enter your wheat season? For those whom the Lord is shifting, it means that longer term planning begins. What does it mean? Manna seasons remove planning, because guess what? I'm dependent on you tomorrow. Wheat seasons require planning. For those of you who understand agriculture, farmers, they plan according to the seasons. They know when to sow. They know when to steward. They know when to dream. They know when to prepare for the harvest. Do yourself a favor. Read up of what it takes to farm. And get the concept of what God means by a wheat season. He's saying that whatever He's calling you into next, it will not be the same again. But it's going to require something of you to say, Lord, transform my mind. Renew my mind, so that when I step into my next season, that I am prepared for what is on the other side. Even if you have no idea what's on the other side. Provision takes a new form. The thing that provided for you before will not be the thing that will be provided for you going forward. I've come to understand a certain statement that says, don't discriminate against God's provision. He will show up in a way that you don't expect Him to show up. And I pray this for you this morning. That He will show you a different way of what it means and how He's going to provide for you in this new season. God provides through work, strategy, cultivation, partnerships, and stewardship. There'll be no shortcuts. Farmers can't take shortcuts. They have to plan. And so, I believe that the concept of the first rain is a prophetic picture for now. God sends the first rain. It is small, it is soft, it is subtle. Right now, God is sending His rain. Subtle beginnings, small breakthroughs, gentle nudges, little confirmations, small open doors, quiet encouragements. Don't despise the day of small beginnings. Don't ignore what God is doing for you in your season, in your Manna season. It is softening the soil of your life for what is coming. Allow the first rains, the soft rains, to soften your heart. Your heart of stone, may God turn it into a heart of flesh, that the posture of having open hands and an open heart and an open mind to what He has for you. Something is germinating beneath the surface for you this morning. You might not have had the words to explain what you're going through or what you're experiencing, but I pray that God may give you revelation. He is doing something you cannot see. In fact, He gave you a promise, but you can't see it yet. But guess what? When the Jordan dries up and it's time for you to walk over, and you find yourself in that situation where God says, I'm not providing manna for you. In fact, I'm providing for you for a very long time. My miracle will not just be daily, it will be forever and generationally. May you experience the latter rain in your life. And so as we conclude, are we in a Manna season? What thinking or actions need to shift in this season for you? And what first rains are in my life right now? And so please stand with me. As we close our eyes, I'm going to lead us in a prayer. May the Lord, who sends the first rain, soften your heart. Prepare your soil, awaken your faith, and strengthen your hope. May you walk with clarity, not in fear of what is drying up, but in confidence of what is opening up ahead for you. And may you enter your wheat season, whatever that may look like for you, with trust, stewardship, and renewed joy.